So here's the thing. I didn't start this trying to ruin anyone's business. I wasn't sitting there plotting some legal takedown like a guy in a courtroom drama. I just wanted to be able to use my own driveway. That's it, bare minimum expectation of owning a home, right? You'd think that's not controversial. Apparently it is. There's this restaurant 2 houses down from me. Well, not anymore. They learned. But back then it was one of those trendy spots, string lights, reclaimed wood, the whole. We serve artisanal everything at triple the price vibe. And that summer they expanded, more outdoor seating, more traffic, more noise, more problems. At first, I didn't care. I'm not that neighbor. I don't complain about music. I don't count how many guests people have. I mind my business. But then one Friday night, I come home after a long day, already tired, already thinking about nothing but getting inside, and boom, there it is. A catering van. Not near my driveway. Not slightly over the line. No, this thing was parked flush across the entire entrance like it had been designed specifically to block me. I remember just sitting there for a second, engine still running, staring at it like, this has to be temporary, right? Someone's about to come running out apologizing, moving it, waving at me like, sorry man, quick mistake. Nope. I waited. 5 minutes, 10, 20. 40 minutes later, I'm still sitting in my own car, in front of my own house, waiting for a stranger to give me permission to park where I legally live. And here's the worst part. I let it go. Because I figured, new staff, busy night, mistakes happen. I walked inside that restaurant the next day, calm, polite, found the manager. Let's call her Melissa, and I explained everything, like a reasonable adult, right? She nods, gives me that customer service smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes, and says, our drivers are instructed to use the side lot. And I said, yeah, they're not. She pauses, like she's slightly annoyed I didn't just accept the script, then goes, we'll look into it. Translation? Not my problem. Next weekend rolls around. Different van. Different driver. Same exact parking job. At that point it's not a mistake anymore. It's a pattern. And the pattern gets worse. One night, I actually missed a medical appointment. Nothing life-threatening. But still, because I couldn't get my car out in time, I'm calling the office trying to explain, and I sound like an idiot. Yes, sorry, a catering van is blocking my driveway. Like that's a real excuse. That was the moment something shifted. Because up until then, I was asking for basic respect and getting brushed off. So I went back again. Same place. Same manager. Same conversation. Except this time I wasn't smiling. Your drivers are blocking my driveway. Repeatedly. She sighs, actually sighs, and goes, we're doing the best we can. And I remember thinking, no, you're not. You're doing the bare minimum because you don't think there's any consequence. And that's when I stopped asking. No more conversations. No more benefit of the doubt. I went home, grabbed a notebook, and started documenting everything. Every time a vehicle blocked my driveway, timestamp, license plate, photo, duration. I didn't miss a single incident. Rain, heat, late nights, didn't matter. 6 straight weeks, 41 separate violations. And the funny thing is, once you start paying attention, you realize how comfortable people get when they think no one's holding them accountable. The drivers weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. They'd pull up, kill the engine, walk away like my driveway didn't exist. Meanwhile, I'm standing there sometimes, watching it happen, and they glance at me like, what are you gonna do? That look? Yeah, that stuck with me. Because they were right. At least at that point, I hadn't done anything. But I was about to. See, I started digging, not emotionally, not angrily, but methodically, because if you've ever dealt with this kind of situation, you know arguing doesn't fix it, yelling doesn't fix it, being nice definitely doesn't fix it. What fixes it is understanding the system better than the people abusing it. And that's when I found something interesting. The city requires restaurants with expanded outdoor seating above a certain capacity to renew what's called a conditional use permit every 2 years, basically permission to operate at that scale. And guess what? Melissa's restaurant was up for renewal in about 30 days. Now here's where it gets good. Buried in that permit, like page 4, section 7C, the kind of thing nobody reads, there's a clause that says businesses must maintain clear access to adjacent residential driveways at all times. At all times. Not most of the time. Not when it's convenient. All the time. And suddenly, this wasn't just annoying anymore. This was noncompliance. And I had 41 documented cases to prove it. So I organized everything. Photos, timestamps, plate numbers, dates, clean, chronological, undeniable. Then I submitted a formal objection to the city planning office. No drama. No exaggeration. Just facts. And here's the thing about facts. They don't argue back. 3 days later, my phone rings. Melissa. Her tone? Completely different. Calm at first, almost friendly. Hey, I heard you filed something with the city. I didn't say much. Then the excuses start rolling in. Catering company's fault, new staff, construction down the street, traffic issues. And I'm just listening, thinking, where was all this urgency 6 weeks ago? Because now it mattered. Now there were consequences. And for the first time, I realized something. I wasn't the one reacting anymore. I was the one controlling the situation. And we were just getting started. All right, let me pause the story for a second, because this part right here, this is where most people mess up. See, according to standard procedure, cities don't actually care about your personal inconvenience. That sounds harsh, but it's true. You can be blocked in your own driveway 10 times, 20 times, and unless you frame it the right way, it's just a neighbor dispute. And those get ignored all the time. But the second you connect that behavior to a permit violation, now it's not personal anymore. It's regulatory. From a legal perspective, that's the shift. You're no longer the annoyed neighbor. You're the documented evidence that a business is operating outside the conditions they agreed to. And municipalities take that seriously because permits equal revenue, liability, and public accountability. Now here's the psychological side of it. This is a psychological trap a lot of businesses fall into. When there's no immediate consequence, people normalize bad behavior. They cut corners, they ignore complaints, they assume nothing will happen, until suddenly something does. And by then, it's usually too late to fix quietly. So what I did wasn't aggressive, it was structured. I didn't escalate emotionally, I escalated systemically. And trust me, that hits way harder. So yeah, once that complaint went in, things moved faster than I expected, but not in a loud, dramatic way, more like quiet pressure building behind the walls, the kind you don't see until something cracks. 3 days after I filed, like I said, Melissa called me, and you could hear it in her voice. She was trying to keep it together, trying to sound in control, but there was this edge now, like she finally realized this wasn't just going to go away. She starts explaining, again, that it's the catering company, that weekends get hectic, that they're working on solutions, and I just let her talk. No interruptions. No reactions. Because at that point, I wasn't negotiating over the phone anymore. That window had closed the moment they ignored me the second time. A week later, I get the notice, official hearing scheduled, Tuesday morning, City Planning Board. Now, I'll be honest. I almost didn't go. Not because I was scared, but because part of me thought, what if this backfires? What if they spin it? What if I look petty? What if they somehow justify everything? But then I remembered those 40 minutes sitting in my car, that feeling of being stuck, waiting, powerless. Yeah, that was enough motivation. So I showed up. Small room. Nothing fancy. A few chairs, long table, panel of board members who looked like they'd seen every kind of complaint imaginable. And then Melissa walks in, with an attorney. Of course she did. And for a second, I'll admit, I felt that little flicker of doubt, like maybe I underestimated how serious this had become. But then I looked down at my folder, organized, labeled, documented, and I knew exactly why I was there. The hearing starts, and it's surprisingly quiet. No shouting, no drama, just procedure. They ask for the application. They review the renewal request. Then they turn to the objection line. One of the board members flips through the pages, slowly at first, then faster, then stops, goes back, looks again. Another member leans over. Then another. 11 minutes. That's how long it took. 11 minutes of them reviewing 6 weeks of evidence, 41 separate violations, photos of vans blocking my driveway at different times, different days, different drivers, all time-stamped, all consistent. And the thing is, I didn't have to say much. The documentation spoke for itself. Then one of the board members looks up at Melissa's attorney and asks a single question. Calm, direct, almost casual. Can you demonstrate consistent compliance with Section 7C? That's it. No long speech. No accusations. Just that one question. And I swear, you could feel the air change in that room. Because the answer wasn't complicated. It was either yes or no. And they didn't have it. The attorney starts talking, trying to reframe it. Isolated incidents, unforeseen operational challenges, steps are being taken. All the usual language that sounds polished, but doesn't actually answer the question. The board member doesn't interrupt, just listens, then nods slightly, like, okay, I've heard enough. Decision comes quickly after that. Permit, conditionally denied, pending a 60-day compliance review. Now, if you're not familiar with how that works, let me translate. That's basically the worst possible timing for them. Peak summer season, highest revenue period, and suddenly, no expanded outdoor seating, no large event bookings, no private dining nights. All the things they invested in for that season, frozen. And it wasn't permanent, but it didn't need to be. 60 days in that window? That hurts. Melissa didn't look at me on the way out. Not once. But her attorney did. And that's when I knew this wasn't over. That same afternoon, I get another call, this time from the attorney. Tone completely different from Melissa. No excuses. Straight to business. We'd like to resolve this. First offer. Written apology, formal agreement reserving my driveway access. I said no. Not out of spite, but because I'd already tried the please respect my space route, and we both knew how that went. A couple days later, second offer. They'd resurface the shared alley behind our properties, improve access, make things easier overall. Again, no, because none of that addressed the core issue, accountability. See, here's the thing people misunderstand. Once someone shows you they're willing to ignore your boundaries when it's convenient, you don't fix that with promises. You fix it with structure. A week passes. No calls. No emails. Then finally, the real offer comes in. And this time, it's different. They propose installing a full concrete curb, permanent separation between my driveway and their operational space. No ambiguity. No overlap. Physical boundary. Then, a formal easement agreement, recorded with the county. Legal recognition of my access rights. Documented, enforceable. Then, compensation. $6,000. For the time, the inconvenience, the disruption. And finally, the part that made me pause. A penalty clause. $200 every single time a vehicle blocks my driveway moving forward. Not if it happens repeatedly. Not if it causes significant disruption. Every time. Now that's accountability. I took a day to think about it. Not because I wasn't interested, but because I wanted to make sure I wasn't reacting emotionally. And when I looked at it objectively, it checked every box. Prevention, protection, consequence. So I signed. A week later, their permit gets reissued. Outdoor seating comes back. Events resume. Business continues. And just like that, everything goes back to normal. Or at least, their version of normal. Because mine changed. That following Friday, I'm at home, and I hear it, the low rumble of a familiar engine. I walk over to the window, and there it is, the catering van. Same type, same company, same situation, or at least it should have been. But this time, it pulls into the side lot. Clean, precise, no hesitation. Engine off. Driver steps out, closes the door, walks straight into the restaurant. doesn't even glance toward my driveway. Not even a second look. And I just stood there, watching. Because that's the moment it really hit me. Nothing about their capability changed. They always could have parked correctly. They just didn't until they had to. And suddenly I'm thinking back to that first night, sitting in my car for 40 minutes, staring at a van that shouldn't have been there, waiting for someone to care enough to move it. 40 minutes for something that now takes them 10 seconds to do right. That contrast, that's what stays with you. Not the hearing, not the money, not even the agreement. It's realizing how easily this could have been solved if they had just taken it seriously the first time. But they didn't. So I stopped asking and started documenting. And in the end, I didn't need to win an argument. I just needed to let the system do what it was designed to do. So yeah, that's how it ended. No shouting match, no dramatic showdown in a parking lot, no revenge fantasy where someone gets humiliated in front of a crowd, just paperwork, patience, and a system doing exactly what it was designed to do, once someone actually uses it correctly. And if you're listening to this thinking, okay, cool story, but I would have just had them towed. Yeah, I get that. That's the first instinct for most people. Immediate action. Quick fix. Feels satisfying. But here's the problem with that approach. It treats the symptom, not the behavior. You tow one van. Maybe they're more careful for a week. Maybe. But if the underlying system, the incentives, the lack of consequences, the culture of it's not a big deal, if that doesn't change, you're just resetting the same problem over and over again. The lesson here is short-term wins don't always lead to long-term solutions. And what I learned from this whole situation wasn't just about parking or permits or even that specific restaurant. It was about how people respond to boundaries and, more importantly, how they respond when those boundaries are actually enforced. Because let's be honest, most of us don't escalate. We ask nicely. Maybe we ask twice. Then we get frustrated, maybe complain to friends, maybe post about it somewhere. But we stop there. And businesses? They know that. They operate on the assumption that most people won't go the distance. That inconvenience has a ceiling. That eventually, you'll just adapt. Park somewhere else. Leave earlier. Work around it. This is a psychological trap, not just for them, but for you too. Because every time you tolerate something that crosses a line, even a small one, you're reinforcing the idea that your boundary is flexible, optional, negotiable depending on how busy someone else is. And once that pattern sets in, it doesn't just stay in one area of your life. It spreads. Now, I'm not saying you should go full legal mode on every minor inconvenience. That's not realistic, and honestly, it's exhausting. But there's a difference between being reasonable and being dismissible. And I was being dismissed. Repeatedly. So I changed the frame. From a legal perspective, that's everything. I stopped making it about how I felt, how annoying it was, how unfair it seemed, and I made it about compliance. About documented, repeated violations of a clearly defined rule. And once you do that, you're no longer asking for consideration. You're presenting a case. That shift, that's power. Quiet power, but real. According to standard procedure, systems like city planning boards, HOAs, permit offices, they don't act on emotion, they act on evidence and risk. Liability, consistency, precedent. So if you walk in there with a story, you might get sympathy. If you walk in there with documentation, you get results. And here's the part people don't always like to hear. This wasn't about getting back at the restaurant. It really wasn't. If anything, it was about forcing a standard that should have been there from the beginning. Because once that agreement was in place, everything worked. Smoothly. Efficiently. No conflict. No tension. Which raises a bigger question. Why didn't it take effect until there were consequences? And the answer's uncomfortable, but simple, because before that, there was no reason for them to prioritize it. No cost, no risk, no pressure. So they didn't. That's not just a restaurant thing. That's a human thing. People, businesses included, optimize for what they're measured on. And if blocking a driveway doesn't cost anything, doesn't trigger anything, doesn't affect anything. It becomes invisible until it doesn't. And when it finally does, that's when everything changes overnight. And suddenly what was too hard or too complicated becomes very easy. Just like that van. 10 seconds to park correctly. That's all it ever took. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this. The lesson here is not that you should always escalate. It's that you should understand the system you're operating in before you decide how to act. Because once you understand the rules better than the people breaking them, you don't need to argue louder. You don't need to get aggressive. You just need to be precise. And precision is hard to ignore. Now I'm curious, what would you have done in that situation? Would you have towed the van? Kept asking nicely? Just adapted and moved on? Or would you have gone the same route? Document everything, find the leverage point, and let the system handle it? Drop your take in the comments. Because honestly, there's no single right answer here. Just different thresholds for what people are willing to tolerate. And if you're into stories like this, real situations where the smallest detail ends up flipping the entire outcome, where understanding the rules matters more than winning the argument, then yeah, stick around. Because there are a lot more of these than you think.